The late summer air in Charleston always clung to the skin like a damp cloth thick with salt and the hum of cicadas. Marissa Blake wiped her brow with the back of her hand as she leaned over the stainless steel counter, meticulously plating a roasted duck breast over a bed of blood orange and fennel salad. Her team buzzed around her in the tight quarters of the bistro kitchen, the low murmur of pots clanging and the hiss of pans drowning out conversation. It was 4:40 p.m., 20 minutes before service, and the first dinner guests would soon arrive. The prep list was nearly complete. Everything was aligned for another flawless Friday night at Elliott's Table, the boutique restaurant where Marissa had built her name over the last 6 years. The general manager was double-checking reservations. The hostess was already setting wine glasses in place. Marissa had run this show with the precision never once missing a shift. But tonight would be different. Without fanfare or goodbye, she would vanish within the hour. Most who remembered that night spoke of the unusual quiet that followed. It was not chaos, it was confusion. Marissa had said she was stepping into the walk-in cooler to double-check the scallops that had arrived earlier in the afternoon. She had been annoyed they came late. One of the line cooks saw her enter the cooler, but she never came out. Minutes passed. Orders began printing from the kitchen ticket system. The expediter called her name once, then again, louder. One of the sous chefs went to check. The door was ajar, but the cooler was empty. That moment marked the unraveling. Her chef's jacket still hung on its hook by the prep sink. Her phone rested on the charger next to the coffee machine. Her purse, wallet, and car keys sat untouched in her locker. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been disturbed. But Marissa Blake was gone. The police arrived 2 hours later, summoned after the kitchen staff exhausted every possible explanation and searched every corner of the restaurant. At first, the responding officers assumed it was a case of cold feet or last-minute nerves. Perhaps she had walked out overwhelmed, disillusioned, or angry. Yet, as they pieced together the scene, the facts refused to cooperate with that theory. Her car was parked out front. Her shift was on time. Her prep list was complete. There were no signs of struggle, no broken locks, no signs of forced entry or exit. A delivery log showed a seafood truck had arrived at 6:17 p.m. with a final signature on the invoice in Marissa's neat cursive. But the driver, a man named Colin Reyes, swore he never saw her. He remembered handing the form to a line cook with sleeve tattoos. That cook later confirmed he had signed the paper for her out of habit. Marissa had never made it out to the loading dock that evening. The restaurant closed that night at 9 p.m. earlier than usual. The staff stood out back smoking cigarettes, their faces pale and confused, trying to make sense of what had just happened. News of the disappearance spread quickly, first among restaurant workers downtown, then in the broader Charleston community. By morning, her photo was on local news stations. By noon, missing person flyers adorned every power pole from King Street to Market. The narrative was both familiar and chilling. A respected chef. A woman with no history of mental illness or instability, no sign of foul play, no witnesses, no leads. She had simply vanished in the time it took to open a cooler door. What lingered most in the minds of those who knew her was how ordinary that day had begun. Marissa had stopped at her usual coffee shop at 9 a.m., ordered an iced black coffee and a blueberry muffin. The barista remembered her smiling and chatting about a recipe she was testing. At noon, she called her father to remind him about their weekend lunch plans. At 2 p.m., she posted a photo to her Instagram account showing the new spring pea risotto she had developed. The caption read, "Feeling proud of this one. Come try it tonight." It was her final public communication. Investigators scoured phone records, banking activity surveillance footage, even gas station receipts. None offered a trail beyond 5 p.m. In the days that followed, the police brought in dogs to search the area surrounding Elliott's Table. Cadaver dogs swept the basement, the rooftop, the alleyway dumpsters. Drones scanned the marshland beyond the parking lot. Divers searched the Charleston harbor. Nothing surfaced. Tips poured in from the public. One man claimed he saw her boarding a ferry. Another insisted she had been spotted in Savannah. Both sightings were false. Her father, Lou Blake, a retired fire chief, stood beside detectives in front of the cameras, urging his daughter to call if she was in trouble. His voice cracked when he said he would never stop looking. What made the disappearance most haunting was the stillness it left behind. Her apartment remained untouched dishes in the sink, a pair of reading glasses on the nightstand. Her cat was fed by neighbors. Her staff kept showing up for work unsure whether to hope or mourn. Weeks passed. The story dropped from the front page. Months passed. The flyers faded and peeled off the poles. A year passed, then 2, then 5. Every anniversary, Lou left a candle and a bouquet at the back door of the bistro where his daughter had been last seen. In 2016, Elliott's table changed ownership. The new management kept the kitchen layout, but stripped away the name, hoping to escape the shadow of the mystery. Yet, some staff never returned. Others refused to talk about it. The air inside the kitchen felt different, as if something unfinished still lingered in the cold corners of the walk-in where time had stopped. What no one could know then was that 8 years later, during a routine equipment upgrade in the building's basement, the ice machine would be opened for the first time in nearly a decade. Inside, beneath layers of frost and dust, the new manager would find a rolled-up apron sealed inside a plastic bag. It was navy blue, embroidered with Marissa's name in red thread. And stuffed into the pocket, folded in half and stained dark brown, was something that would bring the investigation roaring back to life. The discovery of the apron was not made with ceremony or intention. It happened on a rainy Wednesday morning in July of 2018, when the new owner of the restaurant, Eric Mandel, decided to replace the outdated and unreliable ice machine in the basement. The basement had not been used in years, not since the original owners closed that part of the building following structural concerns and employee discomfort. It had a reputation among the staff for being cold in more ways than temperature. Eric, unfamiliar with the ghost stories and weary of expensive service calls, rolled up his sleeves and began clearing it out himself. When he reached behind the old ice unit to unplug it, he noticed the back panel was loose. Curious and mildly annoyed, he removed the panel and saw the plastic bag wedged between the machine's metal frame and the wall. Inside was the folded apron. The moment his fingers brushed the fabric, still faintly smelling of thyme and clove, a wave of unease settled into his chest. He recognized the embroidered name immediately: Marissa. The Charleston Police Department reopened the case within hours. A team of forensic specialists was dispatched to examine the ice machine and the apron. The cloth was stiff from years of frost, but preserved remarkably well. Inside the pocket, sealed within the thick fold, was a tissue stained with something dark and rust-colored. Initial field tests confirmed it was blood. Further testing matched the DNA to Marissa Blake. There was also a partial thumbprint on the inside seam of the pocket, faint but intact. For the first time in 8 years, there was physical evidence that something had happened to her. The forensic report noted that the tissue had been compressed into the apron in a manner suggesting haste, possibly fear. The placement was not accidental. Whoever had left it there had done so either to hide it or to send a message. Investigators returned to Elliott's table, now renamed South Shore, and closed off the basement for a deeper inspection. Dust had settled thick across the pipes and floor tiles, but one set of footprints appeared fresh. Detectives interviewed every employee still working at the restaurant who had also been there in 2010. Only 2 remained. One was Michael Drury, a dishwasher at the time, now a prep cook. He remembered very little beyond the general confusion that night. The other was Celia Monroe, a former pastry assistant, now a server. Celia confessed she had always believed something bad had happened, but never voiced it out of fear of being dismissed as dramatic. She recalled Marissa being tense in the days leading up to her disappearance. Not scared, but distracted. There had been a shouting match between Marissa and the former owner, Patrick Klein, 2 days before she vanished. The kitchen crew heard it, but did not know what it was about. When questioned in 2010, Patrick said it was over an inventory error. Celia never believed that explanation. She remembered Marissa coming in early that morning, earlier than usual, sitting alone at the staff table staring into her tea. Detectives obtained a new warrant and revisited Patrick Klein, now living in Asheville, North Carolina. He no longer worked in the restaurant industry. He now sold property management software and seemed eager to distance himself from the past. He claimed he had nothing to do with the disappearance. He repeated his story from years prior, insisting Marissa was volatile, prone to mood swings, possibly overwhelmed by the pressure of running a kitchen. When asked about the apron, he appeared visibly unsettled, but denied ever being in the basement after the first few months of opening the restaurant. His statement did not match with staff accounts, several of whom remembered him frequently doing inventory checks and maintenance walkthroughs. When pressed about the shouting match, Patrick ended the interview and contacted a lawyer. Surveillance footage from the restaurant had been reviewed back in 2010. But now, with advances in video analysis, the Charleston Police Department revisited the tapes. The critical 7-minute window where Marissa was last seen had a mysterious glitch. At the time, it was attributed to a power flicker. Now, tech analysts noticed something else. Just before the video cut out, a shadow crossed the lens near the basement stairwell. It was tall, narrow, and distinct from Marissa's frame. The timing aligned within seconds of when she disappeared from the walk-in cooler. Investigators began to believe she may never have left the restaurant alive. The theory of her walking away voluntarily lost traction rapidly. Public interest surged again. News outlets picked up the story. Articles titled "Frozen Clue in Cold Case" and "The Apron in the Ice Machine" ran across state lines. Calls flooded the police hotline. Some claimed they had seen her in Texas. Others swore she was living under an alias in Florida. Most tips were discarded as noise, but the evidence in Charleston pointed inward. A growing suspicion took root. Marissa had likely been held or harmed inside the building. The ice machine was an afterthought, a hiding place never meant to be uncovered. Attention turned to the restaurant layout. A blueprint from the city's Public Works Department revealed something previously overlooked. The basement had a side panel on its west wall. It was not visible to guests and had been sealed off during the early renovations. Its purpose was originally to house old cooling lines for now-defunct freezers. That space was never fully inspected in 2010. Officers pried open the corroded panel and uncovered a crawlspace no wider than a closet. Inside, they found moldy tarps, discarded food containers, and an old mattress pad torn and stained. There were no signs of Marissa herself, but fibers from the apron matched strands caught on nails inside the crawlspace. The evidence suggested someone had either kept her there or attempted to conceal her belongings. The air was heavy with rot. The team bagged and tagged everything. Forensics identified 3 different DNA profiles inside the crawlspace. One was Marissa's, the other 2 were unidentified male. The case took a sharp turn. By the end of that week, detectives began working backward through employee records and vendor logs. The restaurant had employed several part-time workers, including night janitors, delivery staff, and refrigeration contractors. One name appeared multiple times across invoices but had never been questioned in 2010. The man was listed as Jamie Torres, a subcontractor who performed refrigeration maintenance for Elliott's table 3 times in the 6 months leading up to Marissa's disappearance. When detectives attempted to locate him, they discovered Jamie had died in 2015 in a boating accident off the coast of Wilmington. At the time, it was considered a tragic mishap. His body was recovered, his death ruled accidental. But now his name resurfaced, linked by invoices, timing, and physical proximity to the crime scene. Lou Blake stood on the porch of his single-story home in Mount Pleasant, looking out over the same lawn he had mowed every Sunday for the past 3 decades. His hands rested on the railing, calloused and firm, though his grip had softened in recent years. The early morning light painted the sidewalk in shades of gold, but Lou felt none of its warmth. The news of the apron had reopened something inside him he had tried to keep sealed for nearly a decade. The ache in his chest, dulled by years of unanswered questions, returned with sudden clarity. He had imagined this moment so many times, the moment something would finally break loose in the case. But he had not expected it to feel like this. Instead of relief, there was dread. If the apron had surfaced, then it meant she had been there. It meant she had not walked away on her own. Lou pressed his palm against the porch rail, steadying himself. He had always feared this was how it would begin again, not with a body, but with a piece of her clothing stuffed in a machine forgotten by time. Inside his modest home, the dining table still held stacks of folders, newspaper clippings, and flash drives. For years, Lou had documented every update and theory related to Marissa's disappearance. He had spreadsheets of employee names, delivery logs, bank statements, and news articles. He kept copies of the original police reports annotated with handwritten notes and color-coded flags. The search had consumed him at first. He had appeared on local television, pleaded with the public, and joined community search parties. But as the years passed and no leads surfaced, his role became that of the quiet guardian of her story. He refused to believe she had left willingly. People did not abandon their lives like that, not without warning, not without saying goodbye. Especially not Marissa. She was precise, loyal, driven. Her life was built on order, not chaos. Lou could never shake the feeling that she had tried to reach out to him that day, but something had stopped her. Lou opened the folder labeled Final Week and reviewed the notes once more. There were small things that had never sat right with him. Her sudden withdrawal from a chef's convention in Atlanta. Her last-minute cancellation of lunch plans with a childhood friend. A strange email she had sent her accountant requesting clarification on financial documentation she had never previously questioned. He had flagged that email years ago and requested the police look into it. But the investigation had gone cold by then and the effort was minimal. Now he wondered if it had been a warning sign. Lou flipped through the pages and paused at a printed copy of a resignation letter. It had been found tucked inside Marissa's desk drawer at her apartment during the initial search. The letter was not signed, nor was it dated, but it was typed in her usual font addressed to Patrick Klein and included a formal farewell. It mentioned stress exhaustion and the need for a change in direction. Lou had memorized the words, but now he saw them differently. They no longer sounded like a farewell. They read like someone preparing to disappear. The landlord of Marissa's apartment had mentioned something during the original investigation that Lou never forgot. She had paid 6 months of rent in advance just 2 days before she vanished. At the time, detectives interpreted it as evidence of her plan to travel or escape. But Lou had always found that action suspicious. Marissa was careful with money. She planned every expense. Why pay that much rent if she was leaving, unless she expected to be gone temporarily? Or unless she feared someone might notice if her place went vacant. He had no way to know, but the timeline made him restless. He reached for his notebook and jotted down the landlord's name again. He made a mental note to revisit her to see if her memory had sharpened over the years. Lou visited Marissa's old apartment building later that afternoon. The paint had faded on the shutters and the stair railing had rusted slightly, but the second-floor units still looked the same. He did not expect anyone to answer when he knocked, but a middle-aged woman opened the door, curious and cautious. Lou introduced himself as Marissa's father. She softened immediately and stepped onto the porch. Her name was Sandra, and she had moved in 4 years ago. She remembered hearing about the case. She invited him in for tea, and he accepted. Inside the apartment, the floor plan was unchanged. Lou's eyes moved instinctively to the bookshelf where Marissa kept her cookbooks, now replaced by framed family photos and a small potted fern. Sandra told him that a few of the neighbors from back then had moved away, but one man down the hall had been there longer than anyone. He was a night security guard, quiet but always observant. Lou knocked on apartment 2C, unsure of what he hoped to gain. The man who answered was tall and thin with eyes that squinted behind wire-rimmed glasses. His name was Hal. Lou introduced himself, and Hal nodded slowly, stepping out and closing the door behind him. Lou could tell the man was cautious but not unfriendly. When Lou mentioned Marissa, Hal grew quiet. He said he remembered her. He remembered the police coming and asking questions. Then he said something that made Lou's chest tighten. He remembered seeing a man in a gray maintenance uniform entering her unit 2 nights before she disappeared. He thought the man was part of the building staff, but later realized no maintenance was scheduled that week. He had reported it to the front office, but no one followed up. Lou scribbled everything down. The detail had never been in the original police report. It was a lead he never had. Back at home, Lou called the Charleston detective assigned to the reopened case. He shared the information from Hal, the memory of the maintenance man, and asked if the department had preserved the tenant maintenance records from 2010. The detective said she would check. Lou felt the old fire stirring in his gut, the sense of purpose he had not known in years. The cold case was now warm. He believed someone had been watching Marissa. Someone who knew her routines, knew her access points, and had waited for the right moment. The apron, the sealed crawlspace, the resignation letter, the rent payment. Together, they told a story of someone who was preparing to leave something behind, or someone who knew she might be taken. That night, Lou sat in his den under the soft light of a single desk lamp. He pulled out a worn photo of Marissa taken during a camping trip in the Blue Ridge Mountains. She was laughing, holding a skillet over a campfire. The wind had tossed her hair into her eyes, and her cheeks were red from the cold. Lou studied her face, every line of her expression burned into his memory. He whispered her name under his breath and promised again, as he had done so many times before, that he would not stop until he knew what had happened. He was not searching for justice anymore. He was searching for truth, and he believed now, more than ever, that the truth had always been within reach. When Detective Amy Keller pulled up Jamie Torres's name again, she saw a list of service calls that placed him in and around the restaurant throughout the spring and summer of 2010. He had worked under contract for a third-party refrigeration company that serviced several eateries in the Charleston area. His service notes, scanned and archived by the vendor, showed multiple visits to Elliott's table, often outside regular hours. Some jobs were listed as urgent repairs, but there were no invoices to justify repeat visits. Amy flagged that as unusual. Maintenance technicians rarely returned unless the issue was persistent or there was something off the books. She called the company that had employed Jamie, but it had dissolved in 2016 after his death. His personnel file had been retained through Minimal. It included a sparse application, a copy of his driver's license, and a handwritten note requesting a change in direct deposit. The bank listed had also closed, but what caught Amy's eye was the date of the form. It was submitted a week before Marissa disappeared. Back at the precinct, Amy reviewed the original interview files. Jamie Torres had never been formally questioned. He had been listed as a vendor, not a suspect. That omission gnawed at her. With Lou Blake's new tip about the maintenance man in the apartment building, she began to wonder if Jamie had a closer relationship with Marissa than anyone realized. She contacted former staff from the restaurant and asked if any of them remembered Jamie. The responses were slow to come in, but one call changed everything. A former line cook named Derek Leach agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near the harbor. He had worked under Marissa for almost 2 years and had moved to Atlanta shortly after she disappeared. Over black coffee and cautious glances, Derek confirmed he remembered Jamie vividly. He said Jamie had dated one of the waitresses, a woman named Crystal, and often showed up unannounced. He always had an excuse, usually checking the fridge coils or recharging coolant. But Derek suspected he liked hanging around more for Crystal than anything else. Derek's voice lowered when he mentioned something else. He recalled Marissa and Jamie arguing behind the restaurant one night about 3 weeks before she vanished. He did not hear the whole exchange, just enough to catch that Marissa told him to stay away from the staff entrance. Jamie looked rattled, but he left without incident. Derek had not thought much of it at the time. Jamie was the type who carried tension like a coiled spring ready to snap. He often worked late and never said goodbye when he left. Derek also mentioned that after Marissa disappeared, Crystal quit without giving notice. She packed her things and left town within the week. No one heard from her again. Amy tracked down Crystal Martin in Columbia, South Carolina. She now worked at a veterinary clinic and agreed to speak with Amy in person. When asked about Jamie Torres, her expression changed. She described their relationship as brief and intense. Jamie had been charming at first but became possessive. He once showed up at her apartment with a bouquet of sunflowers, then refused to leave for 3 hours after she asked him to. She broke it off after 4 months, citing his unpredictable behavior. When asked about Marissa, Crystal hesitated. She said she never really knew her well. Marissa was distant, with front-of-house staff polite but focused. Crystal claimed she had no knowledge of any confrontation between Jamie and Marissa. When Amy asked why she left town so suddenly, Crystal fidgeted. She said she was overwhelmed by the media attention and could not take the pressure. She denied being afraid of Jamie, but her tone lacked conviction. Amy returned to the precinct and requested the full incident report from Jamie's boating accident in 2015. The file was thin. According to the report, he had been fishing with a colleague on a privately owned vessel near Wilmington. The boat capsized in a sudden squall. The colleague survived. Jamie drowned. His body was recovered 2 days later. Toxicology was clean. No signs of struggle. The case was ruled accidental. Amy noted the colleague's name. It was Patrick Klein, the same Patrick who had owned Elliott's table, the same man who had argued with Marissa shortly before her disappearance, the same man who had given a statement to police and then quietly sold the restaurant and left Charleston. Amy scheduled a second interview with Patrick Klein. This time, she brought a copy of the boating accident report and placed it on the table before saying a word. Patrick glanced at it, and a flicker of recognition passed over his face. He did not ask why she had brought it. When Amy asked about his relationship with Jamie Torres, Patrick claimed they were casual acquaintances. He said Jamie had fixed the restaurant's freezer once or twice and that they later ran into each other at a marina. Patrick said he offered Jamie a spot on his boat out of politeness. When asked why he never mentioned this connection during the initial investigation, Patrick grew defensive. He said he did not see the relevance at the time. Amy pressed him, pointing out the statistical rarity of 2 people connected to a missing person later being involved in a fatal boating incident. Patrick bristled and asked if he was being accused of something. Amy told him she was gathering facts, not assumptions. The conversation turned cold. Patrick's lawyer ended the interview shortly after, but Amy had enough to justify a deeper dive. She contacted the Department of Natural Resources and requested the original field photos from the boat recovery. She found images of the capsized vessel, the position of the life vests, and the body retrieval. Something stood out in the photos. Jamie's personal flotation device had never been inflated. It had been found tucked under a bench unbuckled. The other passenger's vest had been deployed. Jamie had been a certified diver. That detail made the lack of safety precautions odd. Amy filed a request to re-examine Jamie's recovered clothing and personal items, including a waterproof pouch that had contained his wallet and a notebook. The pouch had been stored in evidence and forgotten. Inside the notebook, faded but legible, were names and initials. One of them was MB. Amy circled the initials and closed the file. Back in Charleston, Lou Blake reviewed a list of restaurant employees with his old neighbor, a retired beat cop named Russell. As they cross-referenced names, Russell paused at one. He remembered Jamie Torres. He remembered responding to a noise complaint in the alley behind Elliott's table one night. A car had been parked too close to the dumpster, blocking delivery access. When he approached the vehicle, Jamie was inside smoking and listening to loud music. Russell wrote him a warning and told him to move. Jamie complied. Russell remembered the way Jamie stared at him, unblinking. Something about the interaction had unsettled him. He never forgot the look in the young man's eyes. The reopening of Marissa Blake's case reignited media interest, but it also cast long shadows over those who had long buried their involvement or knowledge. Some former staff, who had never been questioned before, started to come forward. The public exposure brought discomfort, but for one employee, the guilt had become too much to bear. Tony Herrera, a former prep cook who had only worked at Elliott's table for 7 months in 2010, contacted Detective Amy Keller through the department's confidential tip line. When Amy met Tony in person, she found him visibly shaken. He was now working construction in Columbia, divorced with 2 children. He admitted that he'd once seen Jamie Torres enter the basement late at night after service had ended. Tony said he had gone back inside the restaurant to retrieve a backpack he had left and noticed Jamie carrying a small toolbox toward the basement door. Jamie looked startled when he saw Tony and told him he had forgotten to check a coil. At the time, Tony believed him. But now, with what he had read in the papers, he questioned whether Jamie had been doing something far more sinister. Amy asked Tony why he had never mentioned this before. He lowered his eyes and said he had been scared. At the time, he was undocumented and feared any involvement with the police would get him deported. He had stayed quiet, convinced that no one would believe him anyway. But now, with his children growing up and the case back in the news, he could no longer live with the silence. Amy thanked him and asked for any additional details he could recall. Tony paused before mentioning one thing he had not been sure mattered. He said Jamie's toolbox had not looked like a refrigeration kit. It had no gauges or tubing. It had looked more like something you would use to carry electrical tools. He also remembered a strong smell, something chemical and bitter, lingering near the basement door that night. Amy wrote it all down. It was the first new testimony in years that placed Jamie directly at the scene during a critical window of time. While Amy pursued Tony's lead, Lou Blake had begun his own outreach campaign. He contacted private investigators, former journalists, and anyone who had written about the case. He received a call from Laura Denton, a reporter who had covered Marissa's disappearance for a local paper back in 2010. Laura said she had never forgotten the story. She had moved on to national reporting but always kept her notes. Lou met her at a diner just outside Charleston. Over coffee, Laura pulled out a worn leather notebook filled with her original scribbles. She said she'd heard a rumor back then that Marissa had received threats. Anonymous phone calls late at night. One of the bartenders had mentioned it to her off the record. Laura had tried to follow up, but by the time she reached the woman, she had left the state. The trail had gone cold. Lou asked for the bartender's name. Laura flipped through her notes and found it. The name was Alana Reed. Amy tracked Alana to a suburb of Atlanta, where she now worked as a real estate agent. Alana agreed to speak with her on the condition that her name be kept out of the press. She confirmed that Marissa had confided in her about receiving strange phone calls. The voice had been male distorted and barely above a whisper. The calls had no pattern. Sometimes they came before dinner service, other times in the middle of the night. Marissa had once played a recording for Alana, but the audio was fuzzy and impossible to decipher. She had gone to Patrick Klein about it, hoping for security upgrades. Alana said Marissa had looked exhausted in those final weeks, as though something was pressing on her from all sides. Amy asked if Jamie Torres had ever come up in those conversations. Alana paused, then nodded. She said Marissa suspected he had accessed her personnel file and had learned personal details about her. She was certain he had never been given authorization to do so. That revelation made Amy's stomach knot. It was the first time someone had clearly connected Jamie to targeted harassment. Back in Charleston, the new restaurant owner Eric Mandel had allowed forensic specialists continued access to the basement and surrounding spaces. As they examined old fixtures, they discovered a hidden maintenance hatch behind a rusted shelving unit. The hatch was sealed, but not locked. Once opened, it revealed a narrow passage leading to a defunct utility room that had not appeared on any of the blueprints. Inside the room was dark and dry, lined with cinder block and insulated poorly with decades-old foam board. There was a single metal chair, a stack of stained rags, and a small plastic container filled with what appeared to be protein bars and bottled water. In the corner, investigators found duct tape, a cracked flashlight, and a length of heavy cord. Everything had aged poorly. Dust covered the surfaces. But the room had clearly been used for something. Samples were collected and sent to the lab. The cord contained fibers matching Marissa's clothing. DNA on the protein bars matched hers as well. There was no doubt she had been in that room. Amy stood in the doorway trying to imagine the silence Marissa had endured in that concrete box. It was not a storage room. It was a holding space. The realization chilled her. If Marissa had been held there even briefly, it changed everything about the case's timeline. It suggested she had not been killed immediately. It introduced the horrifying possibility that she had been alive after her disappearance, and that someone had kept her there against her will. Amy compiled her findings and prepared a report for the district attorney. The presence of the food water and physical evidence now supported a charge of unlawful imprisonment. But with Jamie Torres deceased, the investigation shifted again toward Patrick Cline. The boating accident no longer felt coincidental. Amy reviewed call logs and found several instances where Patrick and Jamie had spoken weeks before the incident. A financial inquiry revealed a private transfer of funds from Patrick's account to an offshore account registered under Jamie's name. The amount was small enough to avoid detection, but large enough to be suspicious. The transfer took place 3 days before Marissa vanished. Forensic analysis confirmed the worst fears of everyone still following Marissa Blake's case. The concealed utility room had been used to detain someone, and all the physical evidence pointed to Marissa. The DNA results from the water bottles, the food wrappers, and the interior fibers of the duct tape matched her genetic profile. The layout of the space was crude but functional. There were no windows, no light source beyond the broken flashlight, and no ventilation besides a small grate leading back into the main basement. It was not a space someone stumbled into by accident. It had been created with purpose. The room's isolation made it clear that whoever built it knew the property well and had intended it to stay hidden. The deeper Amy Keller dove into the history of the restaurant's early construction, the clearer it became that this room had been part of a prior phase of renovations. Permits from the city dated back to 2009. The contractor listed was a small firm that no longer existed, but one of its lead electricians had been Jamie Torres. Amy contacted the former electrician who now lived in Jacksonville. His name was David Lunsford, and after a few initial hesitations, he agreed to meet her. Over lunch in a quiet diner, David recalled the work they did on Elliott's table before it opened. He remembered Jamie being on site frequently, even for jobs unrelated to refrigeration. Jamie had a way of inserting himself into other crews, sometimes offering to help, other times just watching. David described him as intense and curious, someone who paid attention to details others overlooked. When Amy asked if Jamie had access to the lower utility areas, David nodded. He said Jamie often worked alone in the basement, citing issues with condensation and wiring. At the time, no one questioned it. They were all on deadline, and the basement was considered low-priority space. But David now remembered Jamie asking about the unused refrigeration panels and the locked access hatches. Jamie claimed he wanted to retrofit the room for better efficiency. Looking back, David felt uneasy. He admitted no one ever verified what Jamie actually did down there. At the Charleston precinct, Amy shared the electrician's statement with her team. The evidence increasingly painted a disturbing picture. Jamie had both motive and opportunity. He had the technical skill to modify the basement he had accessed during off hours, and he had a history of obsessive behavior. More troubling was the timeline of events that followed. Marissa disappeared in June. Jamie died in a boating accident in April 5 years later. Between those years, no new evidence surfaced. But now, with the discovery of the hidden room, there was reason to believe Marissa may have been held alive beyond the initial days of her disappearance. That question loomed larger with every detail Amy uncovered. The presence of water bottles with expiration dates stretching into late 2011 suggested the room had been restocked after she was taken. Someone had continued to maintain the space. Jamie may not have acted alone. Detective Keller returned to the financial records. The wire transfer from Patrick Cline to Jamie Torres had occurred just before Marissa vanished, but it was not the only payment. Smaller deposits were recorded over the following months, often withdrawn in cash from locations outside Charleston. Amy requested security footage from a few of the banks still operating at those branches. Most of the records were gone, but one location in Savannah had retained footage from a fraud investigation. In the video, dated November 2010, a man who resembled Jamie entered the lobby and withdrew funds using a private account linked to the shell company tied to Klein. Amy requested a facial recognition analysis. The results returned with a match confidence of 93%. The man in the footage was not Jamie Torres. He was Patrick Klein. That revelation shifted everything. Patrick had not merely known Jamie, he had actively used Jamie's financial identity to move money. The assumption that Jamie acted alone collapsed. Amy began to believe Patrick may have orchestrated the entire setup. With Jamie deceased, he had no one left to contradict him. The boating accident now seemed more like a silencing than a tragedy. Amy re-examined the incident report. She noted the oddity that Jamie's body had been recovered with bruising along the back of the skull. It had been attributed to the fall during the capsize, but now she questioned whether it was something else entirely. Patrick had been the only witness on the boat. His version of the story had never been challenged. Amy filed a motion to subpoena Patrick's phone records from 2010 to 2015. She also requested GPS data from his car, but the trail had long gone cold. Instead, she focused on travel records, hotel bookings, and toll logs. One document caught her attention. In October 2011, Patrick had rented a truck under a false name. The vehicle was driven nearly 600 miles in 3 days and returned without damage. The pickup route was Charleston. The drop-off was in a small town outside Mobile, Alabama. Amy contacted the rental company and tracked the odometer logs. The vehicle had stopped for over 12 hours in a remote section of the Talladega National Forest. It was possible Patrick had transported something there, possibly someone. Amy reached out to Alabama authorities and requested assistance with a grid search. It was a long shot, but she felt compelled to follow it. A team was dispatched to survey the area indicated by the rental logs. The terrain was rough and mostly uninhabited. On the second day of the search, a ranger discovered a shallow depression behind a collapsed hunting shelter. Beneath layers of dirt and pine needles was a duffel bag filled with clothing, including a chef's jacket embroidered with Marissa's name. Nearby was a rusted chain and a plastic tarp. No human remains were found, but the area appeared to have been disturbed by tools. Amy called in forensic specialists. Soil samples were taken. DNA tests later confirmed the presence of Marissa's blood on the jacket and the tarp. The evidence confirmed she had been there. She had been moved. The timeline grew darker. Marissa had likely been held for weeks or months in Charleston. Then, for reasons unknown, she had been transported to Alabama. The evidence found in the forest suggested she had been alive during the relocation. The duffel bag included granola bars with expiration dates in 2012. Someone had kept her moving, possibly in fear of being discovered. With Jamie gone, Patrick remained the only person with both the means and the motive. Amy assembled her findings and prepared a formal report for the district attorney. She recommended charges be considered for conspiracy, unlawful imprisonment, and obstruction of justice. The morning mail arrived in a plain white envelope, unmarked, except for Lou Blake's name written in careful black ink. The envelope had no return address, no stamp, and had been hand-delivered to the drop slot in Lou's front door sometime during the night. At first glance, it seemed like another community notice or religious flyer, but something about the precise penmanship made Lou pause. He opened it slowly, expecting a typed letter or perhaps another theory from an amateur sleuth. Instead, his hands began to tremble as he pulled out a single photograph, slightly curled and aged at the corners. The photo showed a woman sitting on a bed in a plain room, her head tilted down but her face unmistakably that of Marissa. She looked thin, exhausted, but alive. She held a newspaper in her lap. Lou squinted at the date printed along the top fold. It read April 3rd, 2017. The photo was barely a year old. Lou dropped into his chair, the photograph trembling in his hands. The silence of the house closed in around him. He studied every detail of the image. The bed was covered in a gray blanket with a frayed edge. A cracked window in the background let in dull light through dusty blinds. The floor was linoleum, the walls bare except for a coat hook beside the door. He could see no identifying objects, no clocks, no street names, but it was real. His daughter had been alive at least until last year. Lou drove immediately to the Charleston Police Department, where Amy Keller took possession of the photo and began running tests. The photo paper had no fingerprints. The newspaper was authentic. Amy sent it to the forensics lab, hoping for even the slightest trace that could narrow its origin. The lab confirmed the photo was genuine. The newspaper was a regional publication printed in Houma, Louisiana. The issue matched the headline and layout exactly. Amy contacted the publisher and obtained a list of distribution locations for that edition. Houma was a working-class city known for fishing and offshore oil work. It had dozens of motels, trailer parks, and industrial housing sites. Amy knew she could not cover the territory alone. She reached out to the local sheriff's office and sent them a copy of the photo asking for any leads. Within days, a deputy named Carla Reyes responded. She said she recognized the window blinds and wall structure. She believed the photo had been taken inside a workers' motel often used by offshore crews located just outside town near an industrial supply depot. Amy and Lou drove down immediately. The motel, named Bayview Quarters, was a long-weathered building with faded siding and a gravel parking lot. Amy showed the photo to the manager, an older woman named Doreen, who wore a headset and had a smoker's rasp. Doreen stared at the photo, then nodded. She said she remembered the woman. She had been there for only a few weeks in early 2017. She was quiet, always kept her head down, and never gave a real name. The woman paid in cash and checked out suddenly, leaving behind a pillow and a book of crossword puzzles. Doreen could not say where she went. When asked if she had spoken to anyone during her stay, Doreen recalled one detail. A man named Mick had picked her up a few times in a rusty green truck. He worked on the docks, loaded supplies for offshore barges. Amy tracked down Mick, who turned out to be Mick Callahan, a dock supervisor with 2 decades of experience. Mick remembered the woman, too. He said everyone called her Lena, and she kept to herself. She cooked for some of the crew and sometimes handed out meals from a cooler. Mick said she never talked much but was always clean and respectful. One day she just disappeared. Left a tray of sandwiches on the counter and never came back. Mick assumed she had found work elsewhere. When Amy asked if anyone ever visited her during her time there, Mick hesitated. Then he said yes. A man in a dark sedan had come around twice. The first time, Lena seemed nervous. The second time, she refused to open her door. Mick remembered the man arguing with the manager, then leaving angry. He could not recall a license plate, but said the man wore a suit. Back in Charleston, Amy cross-referenced the sedan with vehicle rental records. A black sedan had been rented in Patrick Klein's name during that time frame, and its return mileage indicated it had been driven over 900 miles. The rental had originated in Asheville and returned 3 days later. The timing aligned with Mick's memory. Amy requested surveillance footage from a gas station near the motel. The footage had been retained on a cloud server due to an unrelated criminal case. In one frame, the black sedan could be seen parked across from the Bayview Quarters, partially obscured by a sign. The timestamp matched the day Lena left. Lou stared at the motel room through the windshield of Amy's unmarked car. The idea that his daughter had been that close to being found broke something inside him. He wondered how she had gotten there, who had helped her, and why she had not reached out. Amy believed Marissa had either escaped or been released, but had not felt safe enough to return. She theorized Marissa might have assumed her captors were still watching her, or that revealing herself would endanger others. It explained the photo's delivery. Someone, perhaps Marissa herself, wanted Lou to know she had survived. But why now, and why not sooner Amy revisited the duffel bag found in Alabama? There were no fingerprints on the outside, but new analysis of the seams revealed something overlooked. A handwritten note had been folded and stitched inside the inner lining. The note was torn and faded, but legible. It read, "I am still alive. "Do not trust the man with the smile." The handwriting matched Marissa's. Amy took the note to Lou, who recognized her handwriting immediately. He said she had written in small, neat letters ever since high school. The phrasing haunted him. The man with the smile could have been anyone, but Lou suspected it meant Patrick. Amy returned to the motel to see if any other rooms had been rented under aliases during the same period. She found one room had been booked under the name Marie Sullivan. The ID used was fake, but the handwriting on the registration form matched the note found in the duffel bag. Marissa had used aliases. She had taken steps to protect herself. The woman they had all assumed had vanished without a trace had survived, adapted, and tried to communicate. It was clear she had been running. The question now was whether she was still running. In the weeks following the photograph's appearance and the discovery of the hidden note, Amy Keller focused her attention on the thumbprint found inside the apron recovered from the ice machine. While the initial analysis had not matched it to any living individual, she requested a deeper scan against older records, particularly those belonging to Jamie Torres. Though he had died in 2015, his fingerprints had been collected during a background check when he worked with the refrigeration firm. The new results came back conclusive. The thumbprint inside Marissa's apron pocket matched Jamie Torres. The print had been partially smudged as if placed in a rush, but enough details remained to link it without doubt. Amy now had physical proof that Jamie had not only handled Marissa's apron, but had also likely been the one to conceal it inside the basement machine. Combined with the hidden room, the duct tape, and the blood-stained tarp, the case against Jamie had solidified. What remained unclear was whether he had acted on his own or under the direction of someone else. Amy turned her attention once more to the boating accident that had taken Jamie's life. The bruising on the back of his head was unusual for a fall overboard, particularly since the official report stated that the water had been calm that morning. She reviewed the coroner's notes and saw that the cause of death had been listed as drowning, but no mention had been made about whether Jamie was conscious when he hit the water. The coroner had not conducted a full toxicology report, and the bruises were chalked up to hitting the boat's railing. Amy arranged for the body to be exhumed. The process required a court order, but the judge approved it based on new evidence pointing toward foul play. The autopsy, now conducted with modern technology, revealed an indentation consistent with a blunt object strike prior to submersion. Jamie had likely been unconscious or already dead when he went into the water. The drowning may have only been the result of circumstance, not the primary cause of death. Amy met with Lou Blake at the police station, and together they reviewed the findings. Lou sat in silence for a long time, his eyes locked on the autopsy summary. He did not speak until Amy gently placed the photo of Marissa on the table again. That image gave him strength. Lou said he always believed Jamie had been involved, but never imagined someone might have killed him to keep him quiet. That possibility opened another door in the case. If Jamie had been silenced, then someone had needed to ensure the secrets they shared never came to light. All signs pointed once again to Patrick Klein. Amy dug into Patrick's financials, searching for anything out of place. She discovered a life insurance policy taken out on Jamie in late 2014, just months before his death. The policy listed a company as the beneficiary, a firm that traced back to a P.O. box registered to a holding account connected to Patrick's family trust. The connection was too strong to ignore. Amy subpoenaed the banking records and traced the money trail. When the policy had been paid out, the funds had moved through 3 accounts before being used to purchase a small commercial property in Asheville. Patrick's name never appeared, but his personal assistant Karen Driscoll had signed the purchase paperwork. Amy contacted Karen and asked her to meet. Karen, now retired, agreed. She had always maintained that she simply managed Patrick's schedule and forwarded paperwork. But when confronted with the insurance documents, her demeanor shifted. She admitted that Patrick had asked her to handle all the forms discreetly. He had told her it was part of a financial investment. Karen said she did not question it at the time, but something about it had always made her uneasy. Amy asked her to recall anything else from that period. Karen hesitated, then said Patrick had seemed nervous in the weeks after Jamie's death. He had stopped attending board meetings, began drinking more, and once disappeared for nearly 2 days with no explanation. Meanwhile, Lou followed up on the note Marissa had hidden in the duffel bag. The phrase, "the man with the smile," haunted him. He remembered how Patrick had always worn a half-smirk in public, especially during interviews and fundraisers. Lou went back to the video footage from the restaurant's early press coverage. In nearly every clip, Patrick wore that same forced expression, a subtle smile that never reached his eyes. Lou began to believe Marissa had been warning him directly. Amy agreed. She added that the phrase was likely not symbolic. It could have been a description Marissa used to help anyone who found the note identify the man without using his real name. It was safer that way. The clue added another piece to the puzzle. Amy built a timeline of Patrick's movements from 2010 through 2017. She tracked every credit card purchase, toll booth crossing, and airline booking. What emerged was a pattern. Patrick had traveled to remote locations just days after critical events in the case. He had left Charleston after Marissa vanished. He had driven to Alabama before the duffel bag appeared. He had been in Louisiana during the same week Marissa had stayed at the motel. Each piece now supported a single narrative. Patrick Klein had orchestrated Marissa's disappearance. He had used Jamie Torres as a pawn, providing him with money, false promises, or pressure. When Jamie became a liability, Patrick arranged the boating trip and eliminated the threat. He had then attempted to hide every trace of his involvement, laundering money through shell companies, erasing paper trails, and relying on the passage of time to bury the truth. But Marissa had survived. Her voice, through hidden notes and a single photograph, had risen through the silence. Lou clung to the possibility that she was still out there living under another name, hiding in plain sight. Amy believed it too, though finding her would now require something more than paper trails. Amy Keller sat late in the precinct, her desk light casting a muted yellow glow across the mountain of folders and digital reports that formed the skeleton of Marissa Blake's case. With each connection, the outlines of Patrick Klein's intentions became clearer, yet she still lacked one essential piece: the why. Why had he risked so much? Why target Marissa? Why hide her instead of letting her disappear quietly? The logic of control and secrecy pointed toward fear. Amy returned to one of the earliest files she had flagged but never prioritized. It was an email from Marissa to an IRS field agent dated 2 weeks before her disappearance. The subject line had read "irregularities in company ledger." Attached were spreadsheets from the restaurant's 2009 and early 2010 books. Marissa had listed flagged transactions, cash orders that had not matched recorded sales. It had seemed minor at the time. Now, it looked like the beginning of something much larger. Amy contacted the IRS requesting all internal notes related to that inquiry. The reply came with a file labeled "Inactive Complaint." It contained a brief note from the reviewing agent. The last line stood out. Source expressed concern over retaliation. Amy dug into Patrick's business records and discovered that Elliott's table had once received significant cash infusions from a corporate account based in Miami. That company, upon inspection, had ties to 2 other shell firms that funneled income into offshore banking services. Patrick had constructed a network of financial pathways designed to hide movement. The restaurant had not been just a business, it had been a front. Further analysis showed that between 2008 and 2010, over $400,000 in undocumented income had been filtered through the restaurant. Marissa, as executive chef and partial manager, would have been required to review certain financial reports. Amy now believed she had stumbled onto the truth and had tried to alert someone quietly. The email to the IRS, the annotated spreadsheets, and her sudden tension in the weeks before she vanished all pointed to her discovery of financial crimes. Marissa had not just been a victim of personal obsession. She had become a liability to someone protecting a far more dangerous secret. Lou Blake visited Amy's office that morning. He had come to deliver a box of Marissa's belongings he had finally found in the attic. Inside were old journals, a camera, several printed recipes, and a flash drive marked "Work." Amy opened the drive on her secure laptop and found a single folder named Receipts. Inside were digital copies of food orders, supply invoices, and inventory lists. She sorted the files chronologically and noticed something immediately. Starting in January of 2010, the recorded food quantities ordered no longer matched the invoices submitted for reimbursement. It was subtle at first, a few extra cases of seafood, a surplus of wine bottles. But by March, the numbers became hard to ignore. Someone had inflated the orders to mask cash withdrawals. Marissa had clearly noticed. She had flagged a few files with the word cross-check written in the file names. Amy cross-referenced the altered files with the original paper invoices from storage. Marissa had been right. The fraud was real, and it had been sustained. Further investigation into the IRS field agent led to a discovery that unsettled Amy. The agent had resigned from the IRS 2 months after Marissa's disappearance. He had taken a consulting position in the private sector and moved to the Cayman Islands. Amy contacted his former supervisor, who revealed that the agent had left suddenly, citing stress. The agent's new employment had been arranged through a firm with known financial connections to Patrick Klein's father's investment group. The coincidence was too strong. It suggested that Patrick had leveraged his influence to bury the complaint. Marissa had likely been identified as the whistleblower. From that point forward, she had become a risk that needed to be controlled. Amy mapped out the timeline again and saw the chain form clearly. Complaint, surveillance, threats, disappearance, concealment, relocation, silence. Amy took her findings to the district attorney. She presented the full report supported by financial audits, digital records, forensic evidence, and witness accounts. The DA agreed to draft a warrant for Patrick's arrest on charges including conspiracy to commit unlawful imprisonment, obstruction of justice, and financial fraud. They scheduled the warrant to be served within 72 hours, allowing time to monitor Patrick's movements. Surveillance teams were placed on his known properties and his travel records were flagged. But Patrick did something no one expected. He vanished. His phone went dead. His car was found abandoned near the Blue Ridge Parkway. A cabin he occasionally used for retreats had been cleaned out. Surveillance video from a nearby store captured him purchasing supplies 3 days before. He had been wearing sunglasses and a ball cap. Amy reviewed the footage again and again, searching his expression. There was no panic, only calculation. With Patrick now a fugitive, Amy focused her efforts on understanding how he had managed to stay ahead for so long. She returned to the forensic team and requested a review of emails between Patrick and his staff during the restaurant's renovation. One message sent to Jamie Torres stood out. Patrick had instructed Jamie to install a private breaker system in the basement separate from the main fuse panel. It had been labeled as a redundancy. In truth, it had controlled power to the hidden room. Jamie had not only built the space, he had wired it under direct instruction. Amy now believed Patrick had orchestrated every aspect of Marissa's containment down to the ventilation system. The deeper she went, the clearer it became that Patrick had not acted out of impulse. He had methodically planned Marissa's isolation to prevent her from revealing what she knew. Lou sat at home with one of Marissa's journals open in his lap. He read her entry from the night she discovered the bookkeeping inconsistency. Her words were careful, thoughtful, and laced with anxiety. She had known something was wrong, but she had not known how deep it went. She had written that she felt like someone was watching her every move, that she could not sleep, that the smell of bleach in the restaurant's walk-in had made her dizzy. She had ended the entry with a line that made Lou's throat tighten. "If anything happens to me, I tried to do the right thing." Lou folded the journal closed and stared out the window, the breeze moving through the trees outside. He did not need more confirmation. He already knew. 2 months after Patrick Klein vanished, the manhunt had begun to fade from national headlines, but Detective Amy Keller refused to let the trail go cold. She believed he had not gone far, only deep enough into the shadows to wait until the noise died down. Using past behavior and a psychological profile compiled by a federal consultant, Amy narrowed the list of possible hideouts to remote locations with limited surveillance access to water routes and a history of personal significance. One such place stood out among the rest. Patrick had once owned a weathered cabin near Darien, Georgia, close to where the Altamaha River branched into narrow, overgrown channels. It had been used rarely, but his bank records showed utility payments continuing sporadically until the year before. Amy drove out to the area alone, equipped with a field kit and a copy of the arrest warrant folded neatly in her case. The road leading to the cabin was narrow and partially washed out. Weeds grew through cracks in the pavement, and branches scraped the edges of her windshield as she pushed forward. Amy parked half a mile from the entrance and proceeded on foot, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots the only sound for minutes at a time. The air smelled like river mud and moss. The cabin came into view, slowly, its gray roof barely visible through the dense pines. From a distance it looked abandoned, but as Amy got closer she noticed the faintest curl of smoke rising from a metal pipe on the far side. She approached carefully, hand near her weapon, senses heightened. The porch creaked under her steps. No locks were visible on the front door. It stood slightly ajar, swaying gently in the wind. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. An empty cot lined the wall beside a crate filled with water bottles and cans of food. A single window had been blacked out with a sheet of plywood nailed in from the inside. The floorboards were uneven, and in the far corner, partially concealed by a rotting rug, Amy saw a handle. She pulled the rug back and found a trapdoor, old but still functional. It opened with a groan, revealing wooden stairs that led into darkness. She descended slowly, flashlight slicing through the stale air. At the bottom was a small room no more than 10 feet wide. It smelled of mildew and old wood. On the wall hung a laminated photo. It was the same image Lou had received of Marissa holding the newspaper. Beneath it, pinned carefully to the wall, was another photo. The second image showed Marissa standing beside a ferry dock, her expression distant, her clothing unfamiliar. The timestamp on the corner placed the photo 2 weeks after the motel sighting in Louisiana. The handwriting on the back read, "She is safe now," written in delicate cursive. Amy turned and examined the rest of the room. There was no sign of Patrick, but a journal sat open on a desk made from cinder blocks and plywood. The last entry, written in steady script, said, "I wanted to forget what I did, but her voice always followed me." I hope this is enough. On the floor beside the desk lay a plastic container. Inside was a brown envelope marked Lou. Amy took it and left the cabin, heart pounding but unsure what she had just uncovered. Later that evening, she handed the envelope to Lou in person. He sat in his living room under the same lamp where he had stared at the photo months before. The envelope was thick and heavy, filled with documents, maps, and one final photo. This image was different. It showed Marissa walking across a sunlit square, her hair, longer, face fuller, a subtle smile touching the corner of her mouth. She looked healthy. She looked free. The background revealed the location. A small town in Arizona known for its artists and desert retreats. Amy and Lou stared at the image for a long time. Included among the papers was a handwritten letter from Marissa. The words were cautious, deliberate, filled with clarity that only time and survival could grant. She wrote that she had escaped during a moment of distraction, had fled through the woods, and followed the river until she reached a rural bus stop. She had no identification, no plan, and no allies. Every step she took was driven by fear, but also by hope that one day she could breathe freely again. She said that she never reached out because she believed doing so would put others in danger. That Patrick had eyes everywhere. That even after his presumed death, she did not trust it. She had waited years watching, moving, adapting. The letter did not mention revenge. It did not ask for justice. It simply thanked her father for never giving up. She wrote that she hoped he would forgive her for staying away, and that if he ever truly felt ready, she would leave a red scarf tied to the east gate of the town square every third Thursday of the month. No names, no words, just a signal. 3 weeks later, Lou traveled to Arizona. He arrived quietly, walking the same path shown in the photo. The town was warm and hushed with winds that smelled of clay and pine. He made his way to the square and sat on a bench facing the east gate. The sun hung low in the sky, casting soft gold across the pavement. As the clock tower struck 4, a breeze lifted the branches of a nearby tree. Lou stood slowly and walked toward the gate. Hanging from the iron rail, tied carefully in a perfect knot, was a red scarf. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life inspired mysteries. Let us know in the comments what you think really happened to Marissa and where in the world you're watching from. We read every comment, and your thoughts help shape the next story.